So I think we're ready to get started. We'll call this meeting, it's a joint meeting of the Portland City Council Finance Committee and the Portland School Board Finance Committee. And I would think maybe the easiest thing to do is for me to look at the screen and say who's here, unless everybody wants to randomly call out their names.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm Nick Navadonis. I'm a city councilor and chair of the committee. The committee members are on, for the city, are Belinda Ray, Kate Snyder, Justin Costa. We also have Councilor Tate Chong with us, and Councilor Jill Dusson, and Councilor Spencer Thibodeau. I think I got all the councilors. On the school board, we have Anna Trevorrow, who is the chair of the Finance Committee, Tim Atkinson, Mark Balfonts, Emily Figdor, Mickey Bondo, and am I missing? Oh, Pius Ali is also on the line. And from staff, we have, let's see, Javier Botana, who's the superintendent, Miranda Fasulo, who's the finance director. I may not have the right title. John Jennings, city manager. I see Adam Burke as a school board member. And I say John Jennings, Brendan O'Connell. I think those are the elected officials and senior administrative folks from the schools and the city. So the purpose of our meeting, we had a meeting last week. We had presentation from the city on the municipal budget, which we're not talking, or it's not on the agenda tonight. And we had a presentation on the school budget. It was a very informative and robust conversation. We didn't take any action. It was a workshop, and we're back this evening with the school board and superintendent to talk about some revisions to the original budget. So I am going to turn, Anna, you or Javier?
I think we can pretty much go to Javier. Since we met with you last week, we did have a finance committee meeting on Monday where we held a public hearing and we voted the budget out of the committee. Then on Tuesday, the school board met and had a budget workshop and a public hearing as well. So we're going to update you on where we are, and we'll look forward to your feedback. And I'll turn it over to Javier.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and good evening, everyone. So what we wanted to do today is bring you up to speed to fill you in on what's happened since we met a week ago. And we also have answers to some of the questions that you asked at the last meeting. Some of those answers you already received memos for. I don't know if you had a chance to look at those, but we're prepared to answer any questions about those as we go through. So just a little bit of the budget timeline, just to keep everybody on the same page. This is where we are in this process. I'm happy to say that we have fewer colorful boxes every time that we meet. So things are moving along, and we're grateful for that. Today is the second joint finance committee meeting. After we're done here, we are also scheduled as a school board finance committee to debrief the conversation today. So we will be adjourning from here and heading to our own finance committee meeting. As Ms. Trevorrow mentioned, on Tuesday, May 26th, so that's next week, we have a special board meeting, and that will be primarily for the vote on the school budget. So we expect to pass that next week and then present that as the school board's budget to you on June 1st. My understanding is you are scheduled for a public hearing and first read at that time, and then voting it out on June 15th in time for the public, for the referendum on July 14th. So this is what we're hoping to do today, is just, as I mentioned, update you on the process, filling you in on what the finance committee discussion was, what the the Finance Committee voted out. And so that's our current budget, the one that's in front of the school board. And then one of the questions that you asked was the potential, the order of magnitude and impact of going further in reductions than where we are right now. And so we're prepared to share that and also talk about some of the things. So we're going to talk a little bit about our contingency fund planning and what is not in the budget and the things that we foresee needing to do that are currently not in our budget. And then sort of dive into some of the questions that you asked. Again, we have memos on most of those, so we won't go into the same level of depth unless you have questions, but we are prepared to sort of walk through the COVID related costs and savings as part of our presentation, since we did not do a memo on that. So if that sounds okay, I'm gonna move into the actual review. So just to sort of ground everybody, we were asked at the last meeting to sort of consider the range of options from having no tax increase to having a flat budget, so no budget increase over the budget that we're currently operating under. And so what we did in this slide is sort of highlight for you what the range is. So for us to not have a tax increase, to not require a tax increase, that drops the budget by $472,000 over what you heard about last week. So that's the magnitude of that reduction. And then to have no budget increase would be a reduction to 117.3. That's our current budget. And so that's actually almost $3 million less than what our the budget that is currently, well, it's $2.5 million less than what the budget that we are currently at, which is on the next slide. This is where our budget stands today. It's 119.9 million. That's a 2% increase over the current year budget, and it requires no tax rate increase. And below that, if you recall, we also saw this last week when the amounts were different. This is what the budget was last year, what the tax rate increase. I think that's just sort of to ground everybody in what the differences are. So this is where this is what we brought. This is what I presented after our meeting last week at our Finance Committee meeting on Monday. I brought a proposal to the school Finance Committee to actually be able to lower our budget so that we would be able to meet that 0% tax rate increase. And so I proposed to increase class size in our elementary schools by moving from our current 22 students per class in grades first, second, and third grade to a class size of 25. And so that is what you see there would have saved us $390,000. In addition to that, we proposed a series of reductions in our central office contractual services. And so the two of them combined were sufficient to get us down to that 0% tax rate increase. The Finance Committee deliberated on those recommendations, and they agreed and approved the budget that actually does result in a $119.8 million budget, which, as I mentioned earlier, does not require a tax increase. They did not support my proposal to increase class size in the elementary grades. They did accept the decrease in our central office contractual reductions. And in order to meet the difference between what I proposed and what was necessary to be able to bring a 0% tax rate increase, the board, the finance committee agreed to have us pursue reductions in cost of living adjustments for our staff to get us the additional $372,000. And as an alternative, if we were not able to get those agreements, and about $100,000 of that amount is in units that don't currently have a contract. Either our non-represented employees or our employees who are working in a contract that is set to expire now, and so that would amount to 150,000 of the 372, and so the rest would have to be negotiated with our units that are currently under contract. So if we weren't able to get agreement around those reductions, the Finance Committee endorsed a reduction to our athletics and co-curriculars to be able to get us to that desired amount. So that's where we are. That's where we are at this moment. We also wanted just to update you on our federal funding. We had talked briefly about this. It was not. It had not been firmed up, and so a week ago we were talking about a range of 1.5 to 1.9 million, or 1.5 to 2 million, and so we did get the information, the release from the Department of Education on Tuesday, and it's on the good side of that range, so $1.9 million. So that's good, and it's also important to note that the Maine Department of Education is not enforcing the guidance that the U.S. Department of Education issued, and instead are holding to the legal requirements that were in the CARES Act in terms of the proportionate share with private schools, and so that is considerably less costly to us in terms of what we would have to contribute to private schools than it could have otherwise been. So we're looking at this in a very favorable light. So it's on the high end of the range with the lower end of the proportionate share. And as we mentioned last week, we have about 1.3 million of that is currently in our proposed budget, and the budget that you are reviewing that is in front of the council, in front of the school board, that 1.3 million in custodial salaries. And obviously we still have to submit our application, get it approved and so on. But that's the plan, which leaves us with a fairly healthy reserve of $653,000, which is significantly more than when we talked last week. We were in a range of 200 to 500,000 is what we were expecting with that allocation to custodians. And so a little bit about contingency in terms of the things that we expect that we will potentially need to purchase for this year, and where the contingency funds would be helpful are, obviously things like our cleaning requirements, as well as extended learning for students with significant decreases in or achievement gaps as a result of the extended closing, and then being able to support our technology needs if we are in remote learning, in a remote learning setting, as well as our ability to connect with families and potential HR expenses such as unemployment leave and things like that, as well as the potential for curtailments. And so I think those are, the kinds of things that we are at this point not sure exactly what we will need, but those are the kinds of things that we need to be prepared for and have flexibility in our budget to address. And then the funding for doing those things, one is the reserves that we just talked about, so the CARES money, but frankly, from an administrative perspective, trying to retain as much of that so that we could use that going into FY22 is the wisest use of that. And so that's what I'm trying to preserve. And so funding for some of these other things would primarily then come from situational reduction. So opportunities to be able to not do some things that are currently in the budget as as the situation calls for. So things like our fall sports season, transportation, field trips, things like that we could potentially not do if we don't have as many kids in school. Cleaning needs might be less than if we will be less if we have kids in school, obviously. So those kinds of things, and then any potential future stimulus that might come our way would also help to address some of those contingencies and tackle potential curtailments and stuff in state funding. So you saw this slide last week. These are some of the important things when the board asked us to say what are some of the things that you would want to prioritize if the resources were available. One was a cat. And then in addition to that was the things that you see on that list. So our secondary program for students who are new to the country and the group that we struggled with during this period of time most to connect with are duly identified students who have special education needs and also are English language learners, being able to meet their needs, the support for our classroom teachers to be able to reach their English language learners, special education caseload, are fully funding our curriculum. This is something that we had to scale back earlier, and our website. So those are the things that are not currently in the budget that if we had significant situational reductions, these would be the things that we would prioritize. Or if we had additional stimulus and things along those lines, these are the things that we would prioritize. And then just to this, we also discussed with the school board with the finance committee of the school board on Monday to get to the range that you asked for, which was the 0% tax increase to the 0% growth in the budget. So the FY20 budget carried over as an amount. These were again, what we talked about earlier. It's about $3 million in reductions. About 500 of that has already been captured with what I presented earlier. And so the remaining gap is somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 million. And so the potential areas to be able to do that, one that I presented is the, sort of removing our cost of living adjustments and steps. Actually, as I mentioned earlier, those have to be negotiated, but that is one place where you would be able to realize a significant amount towards that closing that gap. And then the others are some of the other places where there are, again, substantial amounts of money that are things that we could potentially tackle, but are very significant. So these are equivalent to some of the draconian cuts that the city talked about in their presentations. So things like the totality of our athletics and curricular programs, is about that amount. And then, the combined reduction of of all of our specials, at the elementary level, so art, music, and physical education would be one of the potential cuts. The other one would be it's the equivalent of not staffing our middle schools the way that we currently staff them, and staff them more like the way that we staff our elementary schools. So this is without a large number of exploratory opportunities that our students have in the middle schools. That would be non-existent. They would have the same level of exploratory opportunities as elementary students do. So they would have art, music, PE, and world languages. Those would be the things that would be available, but not some of the other exploratory sessions that we currently have. And, obviously I mentioned earlier the elementary class size, which was one of the proposals that I brought to the board as a way to get to that, to the 0% tax increase, but that is another one of those. So I don't envision that those are the only things that could be done, but those are, sort of to give you an idea of the impact of what it would be like to have to reduce an additional 2.5 million on top of the 0.5 that we are already bringing as a reduction. You can see that we're getting into some pretty significant and deep reductions. To put it in scale, of FTE, the elementary art, music, and PE is about 25 positions, and the middle school change in the model is another 25 positions. So, a total of 50 positions would be what it would take to get us that $3 million. So, God, I can't believe that I'm done with my section of this. So before we move into, this is more of a look at the FY20 financials. I don't know if you want to ask any questions or anything like that before we move into this, or we can just keep going.
Let's see if we have any council questions on the presentations so far. Do we have any counselors? I'm looking for hands. Let's see. I'm not seeing any. Okay. Oh, here goes a hand. Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. That was really helpful. I just had two quick follow-up questions. I know that the manager mentioned in his presentation at our last meeting that the city was in a hiring freeze. Are the schools in a hiring freeze right now?
We're in a hiring hold. We have some positions that we need to move forward with filling for next year. So we have a committee that is reviewing all of our positions before they actually get posted. But we had, where we have openings that are in hard to staff positions, special education and things along those lines, we have posted those positions and won't hire or offer positions until we actually have a budget in place, but we have posted those positions.
And so I just want to make sure I understand. So there's a hiring hold. And so basically about how many positions are open today? Just so I want to make sure I understand the universe.
Yeah, I don't know the actual number that have been posted. We have about 30 positions that we anticipate needing to fill. Those are retirements, resignations, things along those lines that we would still need to hire for. Special education positions, things of that nature. But again, we would not make offers and fill any of those positions until we knew, what our final budget was going to be.
And then just to confirm, so you've got 30 positions that are currently funded in this budget, but that are not filled that you would potentially seek to hire over the next year.
Correct.
Through that committee. Okay. And then I just wanted to make sure I understood on one of your earlier slides, you said that the 390,000, which was elementary class size increase to 25, does that result in how many FTE reduction or any reduction at all? I just wanted to make sure I understood that as well.
That was 6 FTE reductions.
Okay. I think that was in your presentation at one of the meetings, but I can't remember which one.
Yeah, probably not. But I know, I mean, unless you were at the finance committee meeting the other day, and there we did discuss that in detail. So it's 6 classrooms that we would eliminate as a result of having that higher FTE, that higher class size.
And then I just wanted to follow up on one thing you said at the beginning of your presentation, where you said going further in reductions. And I just wanted to make it be clear, we are still, your budget still calls for an increase of 2.1%. But the reason why we're not seeing any sort of tax increases because of CARES Act funding that you outlined in your presentation. So we are still, in fact, this budget would increase your year-over-year budget. It would just not increase taxes. Is that right?
Yeah, and not just the CARES funding. Again, you know, the city's valuation is up, so that automatically produces additional revenue without having to increase taxes, you know, on both sides. We had an increase in our state funding as well. We have, you know, for one of the examples that I gave at the last meeting is we're looking to add 2 pre-kindergarten programs this year. So that's 4 FTE that results from that. And that comes with increased state aid that offsets those positions in its entirety. So, you know, so yes, it is exactly what you said. It's up 2.1% over this past year. And, you know, that the reason that there is no tax increase is a combination of all of those things that I just mentioned.
Thank you for answering my questions, and sorry about the beep. That was my dinner.
No problem, Councilor. Councilor Chong?
Thank you. Superintendent Botanic, can you help me just kind of go through the number of students that are enrolled this year versus last year? And I'm just trying to understand why you were looking to increase class sizes for elementary school versus consolidating other grades. Was that because of enrollment, or just can you help me understand that?
Elementary is the one place in the district where we actually staff on a number of students per class formula. And so that's the reason that we did that. We every year look through our elementary classes and see, you know, how many sections we need to increase or decrease. In fact, this year we're increasing by 2 sections in the elementary grades. So that was that's the reason that we're proposing the elementary class size increase. If we don't have that slide today, but you may recall in the previous presentation that we are reducing high schools by 3 positions as well. So I think that, you know, and that's also based on enrollment shifts and things along those lines. So it's not just at the elementary. That was one of the places, in the same way that, you know, we have reductions in our budget of athletics and co-curricular. We are eliminating our 4th and 5th grade Spanish program. So those programmatic decisions are also built into the budget that you are seeing. So the increase in the elementary class size was a way to achieve the reduction that we were looking at, that I felt comfortable from an educational perspective with.
Okay, I'm still not clear. So there was a decrease in student enrollment in the elementary school level, and therefore that you felt like educationally you could increase the number of classes, or
it doesn't have any.
Can you just explain to me in a simple way, like why?
I'm trying.
Yeah.
I
because that seems to be the kind of like controversial area. Like nobody wants to see increases in class sizes, particularly around the elementary school level. So I'm just trying to understand,
Yeah.
you know,
It's the only place.
it's 1/3 of 1% of the overall budget. I'm just trying to figure out why why you looked at that particular number. Was it because, just a simple answer, because if you did that, you could save other programs and therefore you could consolidate? Is that basically what that is?
So so the impact, the net impact of that increase in elementary class size is 6 out of 60 elementary classes in the school district that would actually increase. When you look at the average class size for grades 1, 2, and 3, now those are staffed at 22, and right now they're somewhere in the neighborhood of 19 and 20 as a result, as the way that they're currently configured, the average class size winds up being 19 or 20. And, by this increase with a change in those 6 classes, it goes up by 1 student in each of those grades. So one goes from 20 to 21, the other one goes from 19 to 20, and that's still, so the average class size will still be significantly below that 25. There will be 6 classes that are pushing 25 in the district. It has nothing to do with the actual number of students.
So it's not the actual average. Only 10% of all the classes between 1 and 3 will get to that number of 25. But overall, everyone will see less than a 5% increase in their overall classes because they'll be from 20 to 25. Because you're adding one more person, which is 5%, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I don't see any other hands. Are there any other counselors that want to ask questions at this point? I think, Mayor?
Yeah, it's not a question, but I just want to jump in and say thank you for such thorough work in such a short period of time. And I spent some time today reading the memos that were forwarded as part of the packet, and I know you're just in the midst of so much stress and struggle right now. So I just wanted to express appreciation.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you,
And
Mayor.
it's all Miranda, and she's up next. So
Okay, I don't see any more hands. So Miranda, it's yours.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So these next few slides, shifting gears a little bit, are really in response to requests from several of you, rightly so, from our last meeting after asking for an update on the fiscal impacts that we're seeing this year as a result of closure and of the pandemic. So I'll start really by going over some of the losses and try to get the bad news out of the way first. And those losses include both costs as well as reductions in revenue. And similar to the city side, although definitely to a much smaller degree, we are seeing more in the way of revenue losses than we're seeing in increased costs. So some of the costs that we are seeing are for technology, which I'm sure is not surprising. That's hotspots and some software platforms to connect students and teachers. We had $15,000 expense for tents for food distribution, printing services for take-home packets. Normally on April vacation, food services, we'd be shut down, but we wanted to continue the food distribution over April break, so there was extra staffing costs for that week. We're also seeing some additional custodial supplies, PPE, and in some respects, some of that budget can be repurposed. Really, we're seeing a change in the type of things that are being purchased, but some extra expenses as well. And we also increased nurse by, I believe, 0.3 just for the rest of the year, and that's one of the nursing increases that is also built into the budget for next year. And we increased a very small part of a communications staff member who has been working extra time since this pandemic started. So those are some of the costs, but if you actually add up just all those lines, it's really only comes to about 220,000. So those last two lines, which are revenue losses, or revenue shortfalls that we're seeing, those are actually projected between the two of them to be about 850,000. So 850,000 between services and our Medicaid reimbursement. So we bill for Medicaid for a variety of eligible services to students, but in the remote environment, some of those therapies can't actually be delivered at all, and the majority of those that can still be delivered are seeing a significant reduction in the number of hours that the therapies are being performed, and so the billing that we can do and be reimbursed for has gone down fairly substantially. So we're projecting total losses there of approximately $325,000. For food services, there's a few different reasons why we're seeing losses there. First, there's no paid meals revenue at all for the rest of the year during closure. But really the bigger issue is that fewer meals distributed overall means substantially less in federal reimbursements. And so while those costs, while those losses, are offset in part by reduced food costs, our staffing costs have remained the same since we're required by state mandate to retain and pay in full all hourly staff for the rest of this year. And those staffing costs are a big part of what those federal reimbursements cover. They're not just covering the food costs. And so when we lose those, we're losing more than just an offset to food costs. So it's actually better for us the more meals we do serve, but we're really not close to serving what we do in the school setting. I believe we're at about a third. So it's pretty significant. And finally, just to repeat what the superintendent has said before, we do recognize that these revenue losses can potentially continue into next year to the extent we remain off-site and in a remote environment. But at the same time, what we don't expect to continue is to be required to keep all hourly staff, fully paid for all hours like we're mandated to do this year. So it should be something that we can manage broadly by being able to staff at appropriate levels across the district and pursue other areas of savings if we do end up in the remote environment for longer than we hope. Fall sports, transportation, et cetera, and places where the superintendent has mentioned before. So that's the less happy side. Next, we do have a fair amount of places where we're seeing savings, and some of these we've discussed before, but places you would expect. So field trips and athletics transportation, spring athletics, which we've discussed before. A big part of this is stipends, but it's also officials and rentals, et cetera, travel and training. Trips employees were unable to take, professional development they were unable to complete in the latter half of the year, crossing guards, transportation, gasoline photocopying, things of that nature. So subs is a big area of savings.
I just lost audio. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Yes,
I can't tell. Is she frozen?
Right. We lost you at subs, Miranda.
Okay, am I back?
You're back.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Usually that, faulty internet connection message pops up. It didn't, so that was just a surprise. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So I'll start over back at subs. So we are expecting savings. Obviously subs is one of the few areas staffing-wise where we have seen savings. There's no way we can know what a sub would have worked. So they don't fall under that category where we're required to continue payment, and we have not been utilizing subs in the remote environment. So it is an area of savings, about $150,000, but I have zero there in the estimated column just because it was an area where we were actually slated to go over budget otherwise. So it's not actually freeing up any budget surplus to put toward expenses, but it is still good for our budget. It brings us back in line and will allow us to utilize other general surplus to put towards some of the losses that we're seeing. So the same is true for utilities. It was an area where we had expected to exceed our budget this year, and I think I mentioned that in the budget presentation last week, that we had expected to go over natural gas, which is why we had increased that budget for next year. We're hoping now to be on target in those areas. So they are areas of savings related to the pandemic, just not areas where we're seeing extra surplus, but they are helpful to our budget. And then, so between the savings and the losses on these two slides, there's still about a $500,000 gap. But just to wrap up, in reviewing our general budget to actuals through the third quarter, and with the help of the savings in subs and utilities, which would have been other places that would have gobbled up some of this the general surplus that we're seeing, I do believe we're going to come in balanced for the year. with some surplus projected in regular salaries and benefits, about 300 to 500,000, student transportation contractual services, and which I think we mentioned in the memo. Some of the staffing adjustments we've made over the year have caused us to not actually need to utilize the contractual budget that we had for student transportation this year. So we've got some significant savings there, and we actually had not tapped the contingency fund that resides in the board budget this year. So that can also go to offset some of these losses. So, you know, pretty balanced, and I'm fairly comfortable with where we're going to land this year.
Do we have counselor questions? Let's see. Counselor Thibodeau.
I don't know why everyone's so shy tonight, but thank you, Miranda. I was just going to follow up and ask you on the last slide that you played, if there is, I know that you said you thought you were going to be balanced for hold on, that's 20. For this year, I just wanted to ask if there was, I'm so sorry, if there was a surplus, what would happen to that? Would it roll over? Would it be added to, I think, was it 653,000 that the superintendent talked about? What would happen to that?
Yeah, it would basically roll into our fund balance. And so, you know, every year as part of the budget, which you saw in our presentation as well, we budget an amount of fund balance. So if we actually meet our revenue targets exactly, and we meet our expenditure targets exactly, we spend that fund balance. So our fund balance takes a hit. If we have surplus, it prevents us from having to take that hit. Ultimately, if we have a lot of surplus, we might even increase our fund balance at the end of the year. So what it does, revenue minus expenses rolls to our fund balance.
Thank you.
Counselor Ray.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Javier and Miranda, for excellent presentations. Very helpful. I think you answered a lot of my questions as you went, so I appreciate that. The budget for next year, I assume, and in having looked at it, it appears to me it's based on the idea that we get back to normal, right? Yeah. Okay. And obviously you can't plan for a pandemic, and you can't plan to just cut a bunch of things that you don't think you're going to need. So I get that. And then I think I also understand all of the different iterations that this has gone through. I guess I did have a question in the, tell me if I have this right. So in the original budget proposed by the superintendent back on May 14th, there was 0 tax increase in that one. There was a
0.5% tax rate increase in that one.
I thought in the first one that the superintendent proposed, there was no tax increase, and then the finance committee changed it.
That's right. So that's the May 7th one. Sorry.
Oh, May 7th.
So
all right. I just have the dates wrong.
Yep. So
okay.
The one we actually brought to the council last.
Oh, right. Yes, I'm off by a week. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So the superintendent brought in one that had a 0% tax increase, but it did have a budget increase, a moderate 2.1 million, I think, or 2.1%, 2.1. Yeah. Finance committee changed that to add back in some of the title investments. That brought it to the 0.5% increase. That's what came to us on the 14th. There was a lot of gloom and doom that evening. You went back, and the superintendent came forward with a proposal that would cut some contractual obligations and also the class size, do the class size thing. Finance committee said yes to the contractual obligation cut, no to the class size, and instead COLAs. That's where you went, to reduce COLAs. And if that doesn't work, then you would look at the extracurricular and the co-curricular. So do I have that all?
Yep. Yes,
okay. So then I guess my question is, how likely is it that you will be able to achieve the savings in the COLAs?
Obviously don't know. We have sent letters to all of our bargaining units, with a request that they meet with us according, to state statute within 10 days. So we are initiating those conversations. And, again, the fallback as an alternative to that is at this point to reduce co-curriculars. So that would be if we, only achieve half of what we need, or if we can achieve all of it, then there wouldn't be any additional reductions to co-curriculars. But if we were not able to achieve those COLA reductions, then that's where we would need to go under the current proposal.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess my other question would be, I've already started getting emails about that. And obviously people are going to feel, people are going to react to any change. So I guess I'm wondering, if the COLA solution doesn't work, would anyone consider going back to the reconfiguration of the elementary schools that was proposed and then just before COVID hit, kind of taken off the table?
So on that, that larger structural change is something that we are looking at for FY22, as we mentioned at our last meeting. At this point, there is no way that we could operationalize that level of structural change in the time frame between now and the beginning of the school year. So again, that is something that we absolutely are committed to continuing to explore. And, I think the concerns that people in the community had are very real. Many of the board members share those concerns. And so I think we do have a significant amount of work to be able to help people understand the value of some of that that comes with that reconfiguration. And that's the work that's ahead of us for this year. But there are other, so for example, I had presented the option of, instead of co-curriculars, my option was the increase in the elementary class size. And so things like that can still be the conversation that the school board will engage in next Tuesday. There is a budget in front of them now, but obviously they have an entire decision-making process ahead of them next Tuesday.
Okay, and so it is possible, I mean, what we do here in this body is approve really an amount. And then obviously all of the how you're going to use it happens at the school board. So I think I'm reassured that there could be further discussion of the class size piece, because as I heard it relayed tonight, not very many classes would in fact go up to 25 students. It sounds like most of them might increase by 1 student. And so that might be the preferable option, although I also, just looking at the trajectory of where we are and where other countries have been, it would not surprise me if you don't have an opportunity for co-curriculars in athletics, at least during the first half of the year. But again, that's not something you can predict or plan for. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. I have Mayor Snyder and then Councilor Costa.
Thank you, Councilor. Superintendent, you mentioned the potential savings of, I think it's $372,000 associated with cost of living increases, and there was a slide where COLA represented a much bigger number. So there's a spectrum there. And I'm just wondering what that 372 represents. Is it across all bargaining units, and is it spread evenly? And is there any more detail that you can share with us there?
Yeah, Miranda, can you put up slide 26? You're there, I see you. So.
Is it up?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Want me to explain it or?
Yeah, why don't you explain that?
Okay. So we shared this slide with, I guess it was the board, I think, on Tuesday evening. So, we obviously can't guarantee that it's going to play out in a completely proportional and shared way, but this is, one way that it could play out if it did. So you can kind of see how it would affect most individuals in the district. This represents all of our different units.
We're
teachers,
losing you again.
Admin. Oh.
So you can see in that second column the what is currently budgeted in the budget that you're looking at for increases in cost of living, and then a just uniform across the board for all units, reducing that by 0.5 percentage point. Is enough to get us close to the 390-some thousand that we would need.
Am I back?
You're
Yes.
back.
Yep. So I just wanted to add that when we actually added back the title investments, we had already built in $100,000 in COLA reductions at that time. So the 372 being proposed in this latest rendition is actually on top of 100,000 already. So it's closer to this 400. It's actually 472, but it's closer to this 490,000 figure. And so reverse kind of engineering that to actually meet the full figure that we're looking to reduce in COLAs, it would be about a 0.5% reduction to COLAs that people are currently expecting. I'm sorry, 0.7% reduction to what people are currently expecting for increases.
Thank you. That's helpful.
You all set? Councillor Costa, followed by Councillor Thibodeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Javier, we just touched on it again a little bit, but can we just go back to the elementary class size again? I really think it's worth hammering on what the number 25 actually is in terms of the policy and what that means actualized. You're on mute, Javier.
Miranda, can you go to slide 32? So this gives you the full picture of those 6 classes that would be affected. So at East End, a 3rd grade class would be reduced and all the way down that column. So Longfellow, Lyseth, and so on. And then on the other side, you see with the cap of 22. So currently what we're forecasting without reducing those 6 classes is average, even though the cap is 22, obviously kids don't come in, in sets of 22, they come in, however they come in. And so you don't wind up with even distribution of students in the grades, and in the, as a result, what you see with the cap of 22 is that we currently have an average class size in the 1st grade of 18, 19 in the 2nd grade, and 20 in the 3rd grade. And with the increase up to 25, you would wind up with a class size of 21, which is still under the cap of 22 that we currently set our class size at. So if kids came in groups of 22, you would actually have a larger class size than what we would wind up with this. With the increase of the cap to 25. And grade 2, it goes up from 19 to 20, and grade 3 from 20 to 21. Does that answer your question, Council?
Yeah, and maybe just another way, because like others, I'm sure I'm getting emails, that are responding to this issue, of course, and I think it's also a point of misunderstanding that a lot of us have been on the school board, so we've heard this before. if I gave you like an easy number hypothetical, if you had a maximum class size of 25 and say you had 100 students in a grade level, then what that means is you would end up with 4 classrooms of 25. But if another 5 kids moved into the district at that grade level, you would hire an extra teacher, right?
So if it was at one school, that would, if you had a school where it wouldn't take 5, it would take, 1 to, to need a 5th teacher, and then automatically the average class size in that grade in that school would go from 25 to 20.
Yeah. Okay. That's I think a helpful illustration, because I think you're explaining it fine. It's just obviously that's a point of concern in the public, and one that I think recurs most budget years. So that's helpful. A couple of more process-oriented kind of things. Can we just talk in a little bit more detail about how you actually go about designating individual positions for the CARES Act funding?
So I'm not sure that I can answer that. I think, and Miranda, maybe you're better positioned to do that. We just selected 20.
So maybe let me maybe back up a little bit. So one of the issues that we're having is we're all dealing with tremendous uncertainty, and so you're trying to wrap your hands around that. We know procedurally, that if what we were talking about was state aid to education, there's a way that we can deal with that under state law. We could go to referendum, but you're able to put out a question that says, but if the state aid coming to schools increases more than you thought it would, you automatically have authorization to spend those funds. So right now, this budget is built around roughly $1.3 million use of the CARES Act funding for specific position expenditures. And now we're learning that the actual allocation is likely to be $600,000 in addition to that, right? So my question is, at what point do you actually have to utilize or designate certain expenditures for CARES Act, to fall under the rubric of the CARES Act as opposed to the general fund?
I'm not sure that I understand the question, so let me try to answer the question that I think you asked, and then if that's not it, then you can let me know. So we need to have a balanced budget now as we take that to the voters, and so we've accounted for the 1.3 million out of the 1.9 million with those 20 custodial positions. So that's built into our budget, now, and that's, so we would, I'm not sure that I'm actually answering your question. I have this uneasy feeling that that's not it.
So what I'm trying to get at, yeah, Counselor.
No, I was just going to ask, are you trying to figure out if there's a certain amount of the CARES Act funding that has to be designated for this year and a different amount for the following year? Or is that not where you're going?
I'm trying to get at more generally just what are any kind of restrictions around the use of that and around the definition of existing positions that we know are actually going to be funded with revenue coming from that. Because one key piece of that is if they are being funded from revenue that is not a part of the general fund, then you also are not bound by all the restrictions around the referendum, which means we have a lot more flexibility to figure out how you want to allocate those funds, which now seem to have come in significantly higher than the initial estimate. So I guess first I want to make sure that I'm understanding that correctly, right?
Yeah, so in terms of the amount, it came in on the high end of the range. We had, originally thought that we would get, between, we originally thought about 1.8, 1.9, which is what we actually wound up receiving. Then along the way, with the guidance from the U.S. Department of Education that called for more redistribution of those funds to non-public schools, then we were concerned that it could go all the way down to about 1.5. So we're happy that we're at 1.9. We had, even when we were at 1.5, we had already committed to putting about 1.3 of that into those custodial salaries. What I think is encouraging about having the additional money is that we can roll that into the following year. It's our contingency right now. We can roll that into the following year, and if we're able to carry that forward, we would then be able to use it to carry those positions or half of those positions for another year.
So, so it is still generally the intent to try to carry over that funding into FY22 then?
That's my preference, and what I have, advised the board, and what we would want to do is try to carry as much of that forward as possible, and then, use situational savings for any kind of contingencies, like the ones that we explained on that slide.
Okay. That's helpful. So I won't continue to hammer the point. I'll just take it offline with some more detailed questions, but that's helpful. Thank you, Javier.
The only, I don't know if this is, again, I'm not certain if this is addressing the question or not, but the federal CARES funding is basically managed exactly like our federal grants, so a Title I grant. And so it's completely outside of the budget process, like you mentioned, in terms of this forum. And that's why we removed costs from the local budget. And, in order to reflect it to you, we have to remove it and put it onto a funding source that you're not actually seeing, but we wanted to just be transparent about what our plans were to use it. And in terms of rolling it over, just by way of example, we currently have 1.3 budgeted. If we were to be able to retain, 600,000 of that or so, that means we could potentially keep for yet another year half of those custodians and only have to add back, 650 or so in FY22. So it blunts that sort of cliff that we were talking about in the last meeting in terms of some of the challenges that we foresee for FY22. So I don't know if that was helpful, but just trying to help.
So I guess I'll put this out there, and I'm not suggesting this. So basically, I'm overriding the little voice that says I shouldn't say this in a public setting. But I'm just trying to get sort of the legal contours here. If you put, for our budgetary purposes right now, if we put nothing earmarked for the CARES Act, you would get authorization at referendum for a higher expenditure amount, and then could you immediately turn around and actually use federal revenue to do that, thereby giving you greater flexibility by a fairly significant amount to manage your budget?
Yes.
Yes.
But the reason we did not was the goal of 0% tax increase, trying to utilize that to reduce the burden on the taxpayer. So, but yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that notion.
Okay, just the legal contours. That's not a suggestion or a motion right now. Thank you very much. That's helpful.
I did have, I believe, Councilor Thibodeau next. Are you still interested in speaking? I don't see your hand up. We'll come back to him if he did. And Councilor Ray, I did see your hand up for a moment. You good? Any other council questions or comments at this time? I guess I have one, and it's been touched on in a couple of different ways, I think, but in terms of, and it makes obviously good sense to use the CARES Act money. I mean, that's what it's for. If it's for custodians, or by and large, then next year there is going to be, if nothing changes, a delta. The following year, there will be an even bigger delta. And I guess I'm curious what the process that you all would expect to be using in the coming year to figure out how to address that issue that is really potentially 2 budgets out, and maybe we'll see a lot more revenue from some other sources next year and for the following 2 budgets, but it does leave a rather large gap in the budget. And when you look just at the debt service that's going to be coming on your operational budget, I'm not really asking for ways to address that. I'm just curious what the process will be so that we're not sitting in April of next year having that discussion and we don't have some ways to address it in the upcoming year or 2. So I'm not sure who answers that.
Well, I mean, I think we dealt with this a little bit at the last meeting where we talked about the risks and the possible mitigations. I do think it might be worth remembering that it's not just the CARES Act, but also the potential hit on state revenue from the recession. So, our assumptions for next year's funding from the state have assumed that the state would continue to increase the percentage of the educational costs that they assume, which has happened for the first 2 years under Governor Mills, but which is harder to predict going forward. So that's, I think, a risk. And just by virtue of the way that the formula is structured, we continue to believe that Portland's valuation will wind up making us receive less money from the state. And so, it's the combination of the having 20 custodians on the CARES Act, plus the potential reductions in state revenue that are significant risks for us going into 2022. I think the primary mitigation is some of those structural changes that we discussed at the last meeting around our staffing formula. So things like what you saw as a potential reduction with our middle school staffing. Those are the kinds of structural changes in the way that we are looking at staffing and serving our students that we will continue. And the other one is the elementary reconfiguration. As I mentioned earlier, that was something that we were, I believe that has both financial savings and educational merit. So I, hope to continue to move that forward over the next year as, some of the structural changes that will help us to reduce our overall costs.
Thank you. And I really I know you're working hard at this and thinking long term, but I raise it primarily, I guess, for the public's benefit that this is a challenging year for a variety of reasons. The next couple of years will bring different challenges, and there may need to be, there will need to be some structural changes, I think, and that will have an impact on a variety of things. So I don't want people to not be thinking of that, and I think that will take a concerted effort over an entire year, not just during the budget process. So that's my main reason in flagging that. Councilor Thibodeau, I see your hand is back up.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. I had a call come in right before. So I was actually going to raise a similar issue as Chair Mavadonis did about my concern about more next year than this year. The way that I see this year is we're taking our free year this year, and we've figured out a way to get to that 0% tax increase while increasing the budget 2.1%. But next year, what really concerns me about next year is the emails that we're getting today, the emails we're going to get as we go through this budget process.
We're losing you, Councilor, or maybe it's me.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can hear you. I think it's you. Nick.
It's just
Is it me? Just
Yeah.
me.
It's
Just you, Nick.
Sorry.
It's all right. I was going to say what concerns me is that next year the emails that we're going to get and the impact to the positions that we're kind of sheltering into this 2.1% block or the reduction, whatever the difference is there, that those chickens are going to come home to roost next year. That's what my real concern is. And if we were sitting here at an actual flat budget and looking to next year, I would say we would probably be in a better position, although there's been a ton of work that's gone in to get us here. And so I just want to make sure that people understand that next year, when I think your projection at the last meeting was, I think it was a 6% increase or something like that. Is that right, Mr. Superintendent? Something right around there. That is going to be a huge burden. And I don't know, quite frankly, I don't know what we're going to do about that, especially if the projections for that we heard at our last meeting hold true and we actually do go into a recession. So I really appreciate the ability to come here to ask questions about what all of this means. And just as you do every single year, it's a credit to you and Miranda. You answer the questions thoroughly. You lay all the cards out on the table. You talk about what cuts to specific programs mean. But I think just as we're doing on the city side, I would hope that you all, and I know you all are doing this on your side, that the aspirational goals that we have may in the next 1 to 2 years need to be paused or reduced. And so we have to figure out how we're going to navigate that in this world. And I look forward to doing that with each and every one of you. And I just thank you very much for the information and the budget as always.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other council questions? And I'm not seeing any at this time. So we plan to have a public hearing tonight so that members of the public could weigh in. So unless we have any other council questions for the superintendent or school board, I will go to the public at this point, and then we can come back and have further discussion after that. So let me get over there. Tiffany, are we all set for the public?
I believe they would need to raise their hands. This is the first time I've seen
Yep, no. So any members of the public who are watching, or I think we have one phone caller, if you can raise your hand and let us know if you would like to speak, we'll unmute you and allow you 3 minutes. And for some reason, I'm not seeing any hands.
Let me take a look at some settings and make sure I'm not doing something wrong.
Looking at the list of actual attendees, I'm sure many of them have our cell phone numbers too, if something is off.
Yep, I see John Thibodeau's up now. Did you do anything, Tiffany, or?
No, I didn't do anything.
Okay. Very good. Before I go to John, just for those that want to speak, if you could give us your name and address, or if you have an affiliation, and we will give you 3 minutes to weigh in on the school budget. Thank you. John, I'm going to unmute you now. You there, John?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Mavadonis, and the finance committees and the school board, city council, as well as the city staff and school staff. Understand this is an extraordinarily difficult time, and I know you all have been working extremely hard, so that is appreciated. My name is John Thibodeau. I live at 114 Clinton Street. I am speaking on behalf of Equity in Portland Schools and just have a few brief comments. The first thing is we support the 0% tax increase to the budget proposal and would ask the City Council to support that as well. We think it's a reasonable position and policy that tries to balance different aspects, different challenges with the focus of the needs now, which are serious and large, but also trying to keep an eye for the future as well. My last point is just something really an issue to raise, and I haven't spoken to anyone on the Finance Committee or the superintendent, but my question is if there is a large amount of funding from the federal government for municipalities and states, which I think is likely, if that would be my guess. And let's say that the estimated shortfall for the city is $18 million. And then let's say hypothetically that the city were to receive $25 million. And again, I have no idea if that's possible or not, but this is, say, for argument's sake. So, but let's say that amount of money, $25 million, didn't come until after the city council had passed the budget, or maybe even after the referendum on July 14th. Is there any way, so if the city was made whole as far as their shortfall, would there be any way for that money to also be used for the schools as well? Because this is a carryover budget where there's still the needs of the highest risk students are not being met. We all know that. And so if there is an opportunity for excess funding, is there a way that it can also be utilized for the schools? And with my wondering of this too, it's a national emergency, it's a state emergency. Would the state give us any flexibility as far as the July 14th school budget election? And again, I'm a lay person, so I don't understand the machinations, but are there any other ways to be flexible around this in case that happens? So that was my last question or issue I wanted to flag. But again, thank you all for what you're doing, and I really hope that you can come around to support the 0% tax increase budget.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. We will answer questions at the end of public comment to the extent that we're able to. Next up, we have Stephen Scharf. Let me unmute you, Stephen. You should be all set.
Stephen Scharf of Cumberland Avenue. I actually just was able to join the meeting and didn't hear today's presentation, but just wanted to weigh in that I support a 0% tax increase on the school budget. Surprised the equity. I'm in agreement with the equity folks. I think, I actually think, pure speculation on my part, that our enrollment will be significantly down come September 1st, especially if there are continued requirements for social distancing and wearing masks. I don't think kids are going to be coming to school in those, it'll be the parents' choice. But I suspect it will have a significant, we'll see a significant decrease in enrollment come September 1st. So I'm not worried about having the money, I really don't think the federal government is going to give us $25 million to cover an $18 million shortfall. That the government just doesn't generally do that. But that's all I had to say tonight, and good luck.
Thank you, Stephen. Next up is Taryn, and let me unmute you. Taryn, you should be all set.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the board, the City Council, and Superintendent Botana. My name is Taryn Southard. I'm a second grade teacher at school. And I just wanted to speak about the elementary school cuts that have been talked about. I know currently on the school board, those are not technically on the table, but I know it's been talked about tonight, and I just want to address some of the things that I am thinking about that. Research clearly states that class size matters in schools with high poverty. And Riverton has a high percentage of students living in poverty, with 80% receiving free and reduced lunch. Superintendent Botana points out that class sizes will already reach 25 after reconfiguration. But it's important to note that the percentage of students living in poverty will also shift with reconfiguration. So we're kind of talking about two different things here, because the percentage of students living in poverty, once we combine with another school, will drastically decrease. And increasing class sizes without the reconfiguration means all schools are considered the same, although we are obviously not the same. And I want to remind you that we are already taking 6 elementary school class cuts. So this would be talking about 12 positions total. And it just really feels to me like this is antithetical to equity for us to say that a school with a high amount of need would be in the same bucket as all the schools in the district. And when you're looking at just numbers, you're not considering students and their specific needs. And then when we talk about next year with the possibility of social distance schooling, we need to think about who are these students. We have students at Riverton with, we house the District Bridge program, so that's the FLS program. And so they have incredibly high special needs requirements, and they are in our general education classrooms. They require additional adults in our classrooms. We have an older building at Riverton with oddly shaped rooms. We have old desks. We have windows that don't open. We have a ventilation system that only vents outside air if the heat is turned off. So more students, including medically fragile students, in spaces that are not well equipped for social distancing. So,
Karen, you got about 30 seconds left.
Thank you very much. So these are all considerations. When we just talk about numbers, we're not really getting the full picture, I don't think. And so I just wanted to bring that up tonight. And I know there are no really great choices, so I really appreciate the hard work you're putting in. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Taryn. Thanks for speaking tonight. Do we have anyone else in the public who would like to address us? I don't see any other hands up. I do now. I have Andrea Levinsky next. I'm going to unmute you now. Andrea, are you there?
Yes, hello. My name is Andrea Levinsky. I am the Extended Learning Opportunities Coordinator at Portland High School. I have a maine.edu email address because I am taking a class at USM this semester. But anyway, so I want to just make sure that you guys know Javier and the school board has already had to make some really tough choices around the 0%. And any further reductions to that would really be incredibly detrimental to both students and teachers. I live in South Portland, but my family lives in Portland. And I'm a Portland Public Schools graduate. And as a staff member, I know how detrimental further budget cuts could be. So I really want to support, at minimum, the 0% increase. And I'm also curious about John's question around the federal funding. That seems like it could be a really useful piece as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Let's see. We have Carrie Foster next. Carrie, I'm going to unmute you. You should be all set. You might have, are you there, Carrie?
Yes, thank you, Counselor.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not going to get into too many details about what to advocate for because I know that there's so much up in the air right now, and everybody at central office has done so much work in creating and recreating and recreating and recreating a budget. I am here to advocate for that 0% tax increase rather than deeper cuts. As you can see from the options on the table, there are no good options on the table. Everything on there hurts our kids. I do believe we need to invest in our kids. We need to invest in the community. I know that there are hits everywhere. Our city's hurting. I understand that. And I feel for everyone. I'd like to keep this as far away from students as possible. And so I am advocating for that 0% tax increase. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration. I appreciate everything that you're doing for the city.
Thanks, Carrie. Appreciate you being here. Do we have any other hands? I'm not seeing any, so I'll give it a second. Okay, I think we are going to close public comment, and we will come back to the council and see what discussion we want to have. So do we, first let's get to some, well, really the only question I think was around federal funding that might come and what flexibility and timing around it. I know Councilor Costa, you're familiar with that. Do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I'm fortunately or unfortunately quite familiar with that. So I'll answer my neighbor's question. The short answer is we don't have much flexibility if it comes from federal funding. We're required by law to put the school budget out to referendum, and what passes at referendum is an authorization for expenditures. It's not anything related to the tax rate. So even if huge amounts of new revenue were to come in, you don't inherently have any authority to spend that money. With the significant caveat that if for some reason it goes through the state, then there may be a way under the law to authorize that in advance. And that is a question that we usually put on the ballot. For those junkies out there, you have probably noticed that we've actually voted on 2 questions for the last several years on each of the school budget referendums. So one is about the question, and the other is about if additional state funds are received, do you want to authorize the schools to spend them, essentially. That's probably the most accurate short answer that I could give to the question, but there's not a good way to get at that, unfortunately, because it is all based on the referendum and it's all based on expenditure amounts.
Thank you, Councillor. And unless somebody else caught another question in there, I think John had that question, and Andrea and beyond, I think they were similar. So
can I just comment on Taryn's comments? And Taryn is an amazing teacher, and we're incredibly fortunate to have her in Portland schools. But I do want to be clear that we are, I think that she suggested that we are reducing 6 elementary classroom positions this year, and that's not factual. We are in fact increasing by 2 positions in our elementary schools this year. So I just want to make sure that nobody on the council gets the wrong idea from that. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you, Javier, and I'm glad you picked up on that because I didn't get it as a question, but you picked up on the fact that there was more there. So with that said, I'm going to look to the committee and the other councilors to see if there are any other questions or any thoughts. The school board is scheduled, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're scheduled, I believe, Tuesday night to take up the budget and vote on it to recommend to the council. We're kind of on a short timeline here. There have been years when, and this is an unusual year, but where schedule has permitted the council after maybe the second meeting to ponder a little bit more. It's probably harder to do that with the upcoming vote, at least before it. But I want to see what my colleagues have to say at this point on the proposal of 0% that's been recommended. Anybody want to weigh in? Councillor Ray.
Oh.
Well, your hand was up.
Yeah, that's actually an accident.
Oh, do you want to talk or not?
I don't quite yet.
Okay. Councillor Costa?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for all the information that you've provided here this evening. I think this is incredibly helpful to us and also incredibly helpful to the public. And you know, I think we just can't emphasize enough that you guys are doing really good work, and we understand why everything that's being proposed is being proposed. And I think in the absence of a pandemic, we're all terribly supportive of everything that's there. You know, to I guess note some of the public comment, I would just you know, we have to emphasize to everyone the context in which we're operating right now. And, you know, we had a joint meeting last week where we looked at a lot of the numbers, and, you know, we may have to have some tough conversations only by virtue of what the pandemic is doing to us. And, you know, the city closed the month of April, you know, more than $6 million in the hole, which is not something that we think will continue on a 12-month basis, but is at a level that is, I mean, if that were to continue for any extended period of time, I mean, those are like, I don't even know how to say it. Those are like extinction level kind of numbers for a municipality. They would swallow the entire budgets for the police department, fire department, public works department, and public works and parks and recreation combined if that continued for an entire year. So I just want to emphasize that, you know, and to, I think, take every opportunity to sort of reiterate some of the points that we talked about last week, which is that I think, you know, we on the council side, we certainly view this as one team, and we're all in this together. We're trying to address a situation that no one can possibly be prepared for, and that none of us, you know, have a blueprint to work from. And, you know, we're all going to work through that as best we can together. As gets said and resaid every time, you know, 2/3 of this city council has served on the school board. Even more of us, you know, are serving as chairs of various building committees right now as we work through all the construction projects. Everyone wants the same thing. You know, the tough conversations that we have to have around this are just unavoidable at this point. But you know, you guys have done really good work. I think everything that you presented tonight too is just again extremely helpful for laying out sort of the menu of options at the right level of detail and nuance, given our role in this, which is only to set the bottom line and not to tell you guys how to run the school department on an expenditure level like that. So that's kind of all I'll say tonight. I know that schools have another meeting to get to. So again, just thanks for the presentation, and thanks for all the work that I know everyone is putting into this.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Chong followed by Councillor Ray.
I just wanted to echo what Councillor Costa said so eloquently, but I also wanted to just add a couple points, which is that, you know, many of us who are on school committees had year-over-year budget cuts. When I was on the school committee for 3 years in a row, we had budget cuts, and those were really difficult years for me, and as well as other people who went through the Great Recession, and they all had to go through budget cuts. With this budget this year, what's really complex and complicated and difficult is that we just don't have the complete pictures. We have no idea what the final number is going to be. So, you know, just in April alone, last week when Brendan presented, normally we receive 99% of all property taxes by April, but we got 85%. We have no idea what that property tax collection is going to look like when unemployment goes away in July for a lot of people, or when PPP goes away for a lot of people. We have no idea what the fall is going to look like, but we have to pass a budget by July with incomplete pictures of what this economic fallout is going to look like. And so, you know, that's what we're playing with. And so it's beyond difficult. It's just unmeasured. And so, you know, 6 out of 9 of us and all the counselors obviously want what's best for kids. And all the services in Portland affects and touches kids and families, whether It's from the GA office to the shelters to the clinics to police and fire. All those services help to preserve and protect kids and families to be safe and hopefully prosperous. But I just want the public to know that when we do make these decisions, it's a best guess. In other years, we know what that number is going to be. This year is going to be a best guess in the worst possible scenario that we can think of, so that we can come up with, hopefully, a budget that doesn't affect our overall public safety. That's really our number one goal. And then hopefully it doesn't mitigate opportunities for people to create jobs or send kids to school. So but I also wanted to thank the school committee members for doing an amazing job. And I know you're advocating doing complex and difficult decisions on your side, but as far as the overall budget, I just wanted to let you know that this is unprecedented. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. We have Councilor Ray next.
All right, now I'm ready. Sorry, I think I was trying to mute myself before and I raised my hand instead. I'm always hitting the wrong buttons here.
Good story, good story.
So I wanted to say I am supportive of this budget, and I am really grateful to the superintendent and the school board and finance committee to getting to this point. I know when I have been out canvassing in previous election times and people are talking about taxes, they always say, can't we just have no tax increase? And I always say, no, it's kind of impossible because costs go up every year. And yet here we are all planning for zero tax increase because we absolutely have to this time. So I know that is a sacrifice on for all departments in the city. But I did want you to know that I'm very appreciative of the work you've done to get here, and I can support this as it is. My two concerns around this whole budget cycle are, number one, that the city, in all of the other departments, is going to have to kind of potentially go not to zero, but even negative, in order to balance things, that the city might have to cut a lot of positions. And I'm really worried about that, really concerned about what that will mean, not just for all of those people, but for the city and the services that we provide, and how that impacts our residents and the people who have businesses here. And then my concern kind of for, I guess for all of us, is next year. I've certainly been in meetings with other town managers who have said that they're more concerned about FY22. And the reason they're more concerned, as Matt Tupper from Yarmouth said, he's raiding every cookie jar he can right now to try to make this budget balance. And next year, he doesn't know where he's going to find the funds to make things balance. So I just want to put that on everybody's radar, that we're making tough choices this year. Next year could be the same, or it could be more challenging depending on where the country's economy goes, and what happens with this pandemic going forward, if we get another wave, So I'll end on the positive note, which is, again, thank you for all of your work to get to this point. And big thanks to the superintendent, the city manager, and the chair of this committee, and the school finance committee, and all of the meetings that you guys have had, all of the pre-work that you did before we even got into the pandemic to make sure that you were working together to get to a good spot. So hopefully we have more to work with next year, but thank you very much.
Mayor.
Thank you, Chairman. And just brief thank you to the superintendent and the school board, finance committee of the school board, and appreciation for the city manager as well, who I know has been helpful in this process, to all of us. And thanks. So we've talked about this many times over the past couple of months, and this notion that we're all in this together. And as I get emails from folks about the school budget, it makes me realize that even more, that we're, the 18 elected people here in the city of Portland really do all have our collective best interest at heart. And the schools are certainly a central and unifying and also grounding element of our community. I believe we all believe that fully. So I'm really, really happy to have a 0% tax increase yield a 2.1% spending increase. As hard as that is, and it wasn't what was expected, I still think that it's a positive place to land given where we are at this moment in time. And as the other counselors have said, I just remain very concerned about moving forward month to month. And I know that you all will be with the council as we do that and assess where we are, as a good portion of the city's budget relies on monthly income. So I look forward to continuing our work together and communications, and just appreciate everybody's work for this evening. And we'll just stick with it each day and hope to do the right things, certainly by teachers and students and everybody who lives in Portland. So thanks.
Any other council comment? I don't see any. I have a few comments, and I'll just start. Well, I should start with thanking everybody for their work on this. As Belinda, I think, said, the school board chair, finance chair, superintendent, finance director, and those of us on the council side of it have been talking since the beginning of the year. And in a normal year, we might have regular meetings like we started out face to face, but and we might have been able to share more during those meetings, but we're in a Zoom world at this point. But I really do appreciate all of the effort that has gone into building more than one budget for the school department this year. And I think that I really want to recognize the work that the superintendent has done and the leadership on trying to thread the needle, first with revaluation and now with the pandemic, and to really strongly advocate for students, but look at the financial realities that our city is going through. And so I want to mention that and say I'm really pleased that John and Jennings and Javier are communicating well and on a variety of different issues. And so I think that is helpful. I will certainly support this. I mean, I think one could argue, given what we know is coming in the next couple of years, that we could have a conversation about further cuts. I'm not sure this is the right time in this environment, but I am concerned, and I think probably everybody here tonight is concerned at what the potential impacts are with expenses, but uncertain revenues next year, when likely CARES funding will go away, and the following year. So I think we really need to continue to work together closely, and not for the council to try to micromanage what the school board and the school department is doing, but just to make sure we're communicating well and from time to time meeting to stay updated on each other's concerns, not just what's going on in the school department for us, but so you understand what's going on with our revenue picture and expense picture on the city side. There certainly doesn't need to be parity on the spending side of the budget. I think the fact that you guys will be at, or presumably will be at 0% on the tax rate, and we probably will be below that on the city side, but I don't believe we need to, we could debate whether there should be parity on spending percentages, but I'm not sure that we need to go down that path, but it would be an interesting discussion for some. So I'm comfortable at the 0%, and I really appreciate the work that has gone into getting to that point. So I am supportive of this budget. And before I ask for a motion, let's ask one last time if I should do two things. I should ask if there are any other council questions, and I should ask if Anna or Roberto or Javier want to make any last comments before we take a vote. I am not seeing any hands. So I will ask for a motion to recommend the school board's budget, well, it's not the school board's budget, I guess, yet, because you haven't finally voted on it, but this budget to the city council.
Yeah, if I could, Chair, my only question is what is the actual motion, since we haven't formally received anything?
That's a good question. I guess we could recommend, pending the vote of a 0% tax increase on Tuesday night, to forward this along to the city council. Would that make any sense to the finance folks on the line?
I think it does. Do we not meet again before this would go?
The finance committee, let's see, this would go to the council. You had the dates up before. This would go to the council.
We'd have a first read on June 1st.
So we may have a meeting before the second read. We wouldn't have a meeting before the first read.
Right.
I'm
so we could do that tonight.
Yeah, I'd prefer to at least give an indication this evening. So I guess my suggestion would be that we move recommendation of a zero tax increase budget from the school board pending their vote on Tuesday. I'm not sure if that's the best wording, but that's my suggestion.
That works for the chair. I'll second that.
And I'm happy to have somebody else make that motion. It doesn't have to come from me unless you want it to.
It sounds like it came from you, and that's fine with me. So.
That's fine. Is there any further? What, Justin?
I don't know who's taking the notes on our side, but
I think Brendan or Tiffany are taking care of those. Any discussion?
I think I've already said what I need to say.
Okay, so I will call the roll of those voting. Councilor Ray?
Yes.
Councilor Costa?
Yes.
Mayor, I think you're ex officio, but do you want to weigh in?
Non-voting.
And I'm voting yes. So again, it's kind of it's contingent on your final vote, but you have a sense of where we are as a committee. So I don't believe we have any other business, and you guys have school board has another meeting, is my understanding. So I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Costa. All in, well, Councilor Ray?
Yes.
Councilor Costa?
Yes.
I'm voting yes. So we are adjourned with a unanimous vote.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.